Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural meeting of the Ending 911 Fee Diversion Now Strike Force, or the 911 Strike Force, which we now call to order. Thank you for being here today. My name is John Ivanoff, designated federal officer of this advisory committee. My colleague Jill Coogan is a deputy designated federal officer. I am also the deputy division chief in the Policy and Licensing Division of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. My portfolio includes managing 911 projects such as the agency's annual 911 fee reports. Jill? Jill Coogan?
Jill, you're on mute.
She's muted.
The first one of the day, not the last. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jill Coogan, and I'm an attorney advisor in the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. I work with John on 911 projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Now I will briefly outline today's agenda. We'll begin with welcome and opening remarks from the FCC acting chairwoman and the chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. Next, the 911 Strike Force chair and vice chair will provide introductory remarks.
Today, not the last. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jill Coogan, and I'm an attorney advisor in the Public.
Sorry, folks, we seem to be having some technical difficulties. I think we'll get it under control shortly, but I will continue with outlining today's agenda. Following the remarks of the chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, the 911 Strike Force chair and vice chair will provide introductory remarks. Next, the FCC staff will introduce the 911 Strike Force members. Then we'll take a short break. After that break, we'll hear from the FCC Office of General Counsel and the Office of Managing Director regarding the Federal Advisory Committee Act. At noon Eastern, we'll take a 1-hour lunch break. Following lunch, the FCC staff will provide an overview of the 911 Strike Force tasks. Immediately after the staff presentation, the 911 Strike Force chair and vice chair will introduce the working group chairs and vice chairs and members of the working groups. We'll then take a break before taking questions from the public. Before we adjourn the meeting, we'll discuss next steps and logistics. Now, I want to go over a few housekeeping items for today's meeting. First, to the members, please remain on mute unless speaking. Second, raise your virtual hand to be recognized, and raise your virtual hand at the end of each presentation should you have questions. Third, refrain from using the chat during the session as the chat does not conform to record-keeping requirements. Fourth, 911 Strike Force related email communications should CC the 911 Strike Force at fcc.gov email account and me, John Ivanoff at fcc.gov. Fifth, the public may submit questions at livequestions@fcc.gov, and we will respond to those questions during the public question segment. With that said, I now would like to begin today's meeting. It is my pleasure to introduce the acting chairwoman of the FCC, Jessica Rosenworcel. Welcome, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I am pleased to virtually welcome you all to the inaugural meeting of the 911 Strike Force. And I've got an admission, I actually really like that title. I mean, it sounds a little cinematic, but the truth is, if you've ever called 911, it is dramatic. And the odds are that it's the most important call you'll ever make. And when you dial those story digits, you probably won't put much thought into the system that's behind it. But the reality is that with the advent of the digital age, there are technologies that could really improve the system and enhance emergency calling. However, we are unlikely to see those upgrades in all parts of the United States without first halting a practice known as 911 fee diversion. And as everyone here knows, that means that when states allow a charge on communications bills for 911 service, they shouldn't be turning around and sending those fees elsewhere and shortchanging public safety in the process. Plus, we know the results of 911 fee diversion can be tragic. It can lead to understaffed calling centers, longer wait times in an emergency, and sluggish dispatch for public safety personnel. And it can slow the ability of 911 call centers to update their systems to support digital age technologies. Now, the problem of fee diversion is not new. I actually first wrote about this subject more than 4 years ago. I later testified before Congress about it. Then I shared my pen with my former colleague, Commissioner Michael O'Reilly, who was also really concerned about this practice. And then last year, Congress responded and enacted new legislation that provides the FCC with some fresh tools to help solve this problem. So we're wasting no time. And as the statute directs, the Federal Communications Commission is currently engaged in a rulemaking to ensure that fees that say they are for 911 really do go to 911. In fact, we issued draft rules on February 17th of this year, and I'm going to soon circulate to my fellow commissioners a draft decision with final results. But that's not all. Congress also directed the commission to create a 911 strike force with representatives from states, local jurisdictions, consumer groups, and public safety organizations to study and report to Congress on what more can be done to end fee diversion. And of course, that's where you come in. You have all been selected because of your expertise. You also bring a wide variety of perspectives to this work. So I want you to know all good ideas are welcome. We need them. In fact, I believe if you have a robust discussion, you are going to help us make a meaningful difference as we navigate the challenge of ending 911 fee diversion nationwide. So a special thank you to Kelly Merriweather for agreeing to lead this group. And I really want to have a warm welcome to all of our new 911 strike force members. I look forward to the work you're doing. Please know my office is always open to assist. And because I can't resist, let me just end by saying, may the force be with you. Have a good meeting.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you.
Now, I would like to introduce Lisa Folks, Chief of the FCC's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. Lisa?
Thank you, John. Good morning to the Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the Commission's new 911 strike force. Each year, Americans place over 200 million 911 calls. Much of the funding for the 911 system is provided through 911 fees that are established by state and local jurisdictions and appear on customer bills for wireless, wireline, and other communication services. Despite the critical importance of 911, the Commission's annual reports on 911 fees show time and again that some states use some of this money for non-911 purposes. This diversion deprives 911 call centers of the funding they need to function effectively and to modernize, which may even put lives at risk. Congress and the Commission agree that 911 fee diversion needs to end now. Last December, Congress enacted legislation to address this problem. Among other things, the legislation directs the Commission to establish this group, the Ending 911 Fee Diversion Now Strike Force. Congress requires the strike force to study how the federal government can most expeditiously end 911 fee diversion and report back on its findings no later than September 23rd of this year. This summer, the strike force will study how the government's laws and regulations can be used to expeditiously end 911 fee diversion, whether criminal penalties could prevent fee diversion, and what impacts result from fee diversion. The strike force's report to Congress will include recommendations on actions that federal entities could take and any appropriate changes to laws or regulations to end diversion. The report will also include a description of any progress that federal agencies have made in implementing those recommendations. The turnaround is short, but this strike force brings together the right team to meet this challenge. This team includes seasoned state 911 administrators, public safety organizations, a public interest and consumer group, and groups representing public safety answering point professionals, among others. The diverse perspectives and years of 911 experience represented here will be a crucial resource for delivering a thorough, balanced report to Congress. Thank you to all the strike force members for stepping up to serve. Many of you are familiar faces, and we greatly appreciate your willingness to take on an important role to end 911 fee diversion. I particularly want to thank Kelly Merriweather for serving as chair and Stephen Sharp for serving as vice chair of the 911 strike force. Under their leadership and with the hard work of the entire team, I am confident that the recommendations in the report will aid Congress's deliberations on this important public safety issue. I also want to thank FCC staff John Evanoff, the designated federal officer for this Federal Advisory Committee, Jill Coogan, Deputy Designated Federal Officer, and Rachel Ware, Working Group Liaison, for all the work that they have done and will do to assist the strike force in accomplishing its goal. Thank you and have a great meeting.
Thank you, Lisa. At this time, I would like to introduce the chair of the 911 Strike Force, Kelly Merriweather. Kelly is the executive director of the Texas Commission on State Emergency Communications, and she will be serving as a representative of the National Association of State 911 Administrators, NASNA, as NASNA's current vice president and incoming president. Kelly?
Good morning. Thank you, John. And thank you, Chairwoman Rosenworcel and Chief Phelps, for your remarks and your leadership and for selecting me and each of the individuals here today to serve on the strike force. I think we, like all of you, are all committed to continued success, enhancement, and support of 911 systems across the country. I'm particularly honored to have been selected to chair the strike force on ending fee diversion alongside Steve Sharp, our vice chair. After only a couple of conversations, I know that our working leadership styles are very complementary, which I think will make for a very productive experience for all of us through this summer. Along with Steve, I'm looking forward to successfully leading the strike force and fulfilling its important mission to study how the federal government can take steps to end fee diversion and to develop and submit a report to Congress with its recommendations. I'm very privileged to be serving on the strike force as a representative of NASNA. And for those of you who may not be familiar with NASNA, NASNA is comprised of members representing the states and U.S. territories on public policy issues impacting the successful implementation and operation of 911 systems across the country. Much like the composition of this group, the strike force, I believe, each state brings to NASNA, like you will bring to this group, its own unique perspective on implementation and operations. Just like each state has its own unique 911 implementation and operation based on its own needs and demographics, as well as its own state statutory constructs. Although diverse in our makeup, our members face common issues and challenges, just like the members of the strike force. NASNA serves as a centralized information sharing and support network for 911 program administrators. Let's face it, it's really our support group for each other. Our leadership, represented by NASNA members, seeks to assist all sorts of sectors across the ecosystem of emergency communications, including public policy makers, private sector, and emergency communications at all levels to address complex issues and emerging issues surrounding emergency communications. NASNA supports the implementation and maintenance and facilitation of sound policies for our nation's 911 system, and of course, ending fee diversion. It's from this perspective that I hope to guide the strike force through the process of delivering on the mission set out for us. We are all here because of our common interest in the topic at hand. I think we all understand and respect the challenging issues of ending fee diversion, not only because of its fundamental importance to public safety and because of the wide-ranging impact and implication policy may have on the very 911 systems it seeks to protect. I look forward to serving alongside Steve and all of you, the talented and highly qualified individuals that have been selected for this strike force. We've been given an important and heavy lift and a very short time to complete our mission. In my opinion, I agree with Chairwoman. Congress aptly named this committee a strike force. We will come together quickly. We will have razor sharp focus, and we will have to accomplish our mission in a very short period of time. I'll do all I can to successfully lead and guide this strike force and process to deliver a report to Congress that addresses the issue of ending fee diversion with meaning and impact. Thank you very much, Chairwoman, for selecting me, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to serve and lead.
Thank you, Kelly. Now, I'd like to introduce the 911 Strike Force Vice Chair, Stephen C. Sharp. Stephen is the Genesee County Director of Emergency Communications, and he will be serving as a representative of the New York State 911 Coordinators Association. Stephen?
Good morning. I am Dr. Stephen Sharp, and I am representing the New York State 911 Coordinators Association. I want to thank Chairwoman Rosenworcel for this opportunity, along with Chief Folks for believing in this strike force and putting everything together. I also want to thank the FCC staff who have been working tirelessly behind the scenes to make this happen. In New York State, we have been dealing with 911 fee diversion for the past 25 years. In fact, the organization that I represent, one of the issues that we were facing back in 1996 when this organization was formed was the fact that the fees were being diverted away from the counties who were providing 911 services. This issue is continuing today. Right now in New York State, of the $247 million that were collected in FY 2020 to 2021, only $75 million is earmarked to go towards public safety communications. And of that 75 million, only 10 million is specifically allocated for 911 or PSAP operations. That's approximately 4% of all the revenues that were collected last year. We support the allocation of public safety communication surcharge revenues for a multitude of different applications, including next generation 911 infrastructure, PSAP internet and phone connections, PSAP facility and utility costs, personnel costs, computer-aided dispatch, land mobile radio infrastructure. We believe that as our technology advances, that the emergency services information network, which includes phone, land mobile radio, and data networks, will create more and more opportunities for success and also more and more complexity as our state and local legislatures decide how to allocate and how to best utilize those 911 fee funds. 911 fee diversion is a problem that we must solve. We object to funds being funneled directly into state and local general fund accounts. All 911 or public safety communication surcharge revenue should be collected and distributed to identified accounts and held in trust in case revenues exceed expenditures for a particular budget cycle. Revenues should be identifiable and audible and transparent, so that way taxpayers know how their money is being spent. In a federal system of government, it is difficult for the United States government to hold states accountable for how they spend locally sourced revenues based on the 10th Amendment. That said, there are clear examples of both federal and state governments using grant funding to ensure compliance to standard. In our home state of New York, there are state guidelines and grant requirements that create incentives for compliance to best practices and standards. For us, it's hard to imagine how the US government can leverage enough money to stop this practice. As stated earlier, the state of New York collected $247 million in revenues for fiscal year 2020 to 2021 alone, which is more than the entire federal government allocates towards 911 grants and spending. So the question then becomes, especially for this task force, is what levers of influence can the federal government use to curb 911 fee diversion? And that's what we're here today. We have a number of great subject matter experts. We've got great members of this strike force, as well as working group members that are hopefully going to put their heads together and try and accomplish a pretty huge task in a short amount of time to try and answer some of those questions and advise Congress on what we have to do next. I want to thank the FCC for the time and consideration in the matter of 911 fee diversion. We believe that New York State is one of the worst offenders, but we also have to recognize the fact that there are many states that are doing it right, and we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, to speak. So we need to look to other states' models of how they fund and how they distribute those 911 fees to see if we can establish best practices so that states like New York can look to their example and maybe improve their processes internally. I look forward to working on this team as vice chair. I look forward to working under Kelly's leadership. I look forward to working with the working group chairs and vice chairs. There's a lot of work ahead, and I look forward to meeting and working with you all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Stephen. Now we will introduce the 911 Strike Force members. We have some very distinguished members on the 911 Strike Force, and we are very grateful to each of you for volunteering to dedicate your expertise, time, and efforts for this important work. The 911 Strike Force is comprised of at least one person from each of the 8 statutory membership categories enumerated by Congress. Jill Coogan will call out the names of all the members in alphabetical order and give each of them the opportunity to tell us about themselves. Jill?
Thank you, John. As I call on each strike force member, please tell us who you work for, who you are representing on the strike force, and a little bit about your work and your 911 background. We ask each of you to please try to keep your remarks to 2 minutes or less, since we have many participants to introduce and a full program today, and we want to try to stay on schedule. You'll have a lot more time to get to know each other once the working groups start their work. In addition, as a general reminder, please make any required disclosures regarding your affiliations in your introduction. I apologize in advance if I mispronounce your names. So let's get started with Cindy Barbera Borelli. Cindy?
Good morning, everyone. I am the statewide 911 administrator working under the Illinois State Police, and I am representing statewide 911 administrators across the country. I'm also a regional director for the Illinois chapter of the National Emergency Number Association. 911 is woven into the fabric of my life. I've served in various 911 capacities throughout my career, from a call taker dispatcher to Illinois' first 911 administrator to an appointment to the 911 Strike Force. These varied opportunities have provided me with the privilege to serve the citizens of the state of Illinois and to ensure that they and citizens throughout the country always have an access to 911 to get assistance for whatever their emergency may be.
Thank you, Cindy. Now we'll go to Richard Bradford. Richard?
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to meet you all. I recognize some names, but not all, but I look forward to getting to know everyone as we work together through the coming months. I am a Special Deputy Attorney General. That's a working title, and I've been with the North Carolina Attorney General's office since March of 2000. I was in private practice prior to that for a bit more than a decade. My client agencies include the Department of Information Technology, which is the state's IT agency, and also the State 911 Board. I've represented the 911 Board here in North Carolina for about 20 years. So it's been a distinct pleasure to work with a fine group of people here. Some of the issues that we'll be talking about have, of course, been topics of discussion here in North Carolina. My background is in law and technology. I was a science guy all my life and in college, and I pursued that in my legal career as well. I was a volunteer medic 40 some years ago. So 911 was important then. It's changed quite a lot from a technology standpoint. It continues to change and evolve, as Vice Chair Sharp mentioned. I look forward to those issues and any others that come our way over the next couple of months. So again, look forward to working with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Next, we'll go to Daryl Branson. Daryl? Daryl, you're on mute if you're speaking.
How about, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you, yes.
I apologize for that. My computer likes to switch to the wrong microphone. My name is Daryl Branson. I'm the State 911 Program Manager for the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. I'm here representing the commission, but also representing states that have not been found to have diverted 911 fees. I have over 22 years of experience in 911. I started off as a telecommunicator. I've worked as a supervisor and a PSAP manager prior to moving on to a statewide position with the Colorado 911 Resource Center, and finally now with the Colorado Public Utilities Commission, which oversees 911 service in the state. I am also affiliated with the Colorado chapter of NENA APCO as the co-chair of the Technology Committee, and I'm treasurer of both the Colorado 911 Resource Center and the National Association of State 911 Administrators. I'm hoping that through this process, we can identify ways to discourage 911 fee diversion without having a overly disruptive effect on states that have so far not been found to have diverted 911 fees. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daryl. Next, we'll go to Terry Clark. Terry?
Hello, everyone. My name is Terry Clark, and I'm the Chief of Police for the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation. I would first like to thank the 911 Strike Force for the opportunity to participate in this commission. I've been employed in law enforcement profession for about 27 years. In those 27 years, I also honorably retired from the Kansas Army National Guard. A little bit about myself. Me and my wife, Kim, we have 5 children, 3 grandchildren. And we're fairly new to 911 PSAP operations. And being a tribal entity, that our 911 communication is through the statewide call handling system through NextGen 911. In that process, over the last couple of years, I was nominated to the NextGen 911 Coordinating Council for the state of Kansas. So being a law enforcement officer for as long as I have, I've learned more about 911 in the last 2.5 years than I ever thought I would as being a police officer. I am looking forward to seeing this process and how it plays out. I believe Kansas, the state of Kansas itself, which I don't speak for the state of Kansas at all, I believe they do a really, really good job on their distribution of 911 funds. And again, like I said, I truly appreciate the opportunity, and I am looking forward to getting to know everybody on the commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Next, we'll go to Budge Courier.
Hi, my name is Budge Courier. I'm representing the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. I serve as the 911 branch manager and also the statewide interoperability coordinator for the state of California. I have responsibility for emergency communications and responding to disasters and planned events throughout the state. I also manage the state's 911 system. Our 911 system has an average call volume per year of about 27 million 911 calls. So it's a rather large system. We're in the process right now of transitioning the system to NextGen 911 based on the NENA I3 standard. I've got a passion to provide the leadership needed for our public safety answering points in California to make sure that the first responders have the resources that they need to provide those critical services. And I really embrace new technologies, and as a state that is not diverting funds, I can tell you the value of having a very solid funding mechanism within the state so that we can ensure that emerging technologies and innovations are available for our PSAPs. So thank you, and I look forward to serving as the chair of Working Group 1. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bud. And next we'll go to Lori Flaherty. Hi, Lori.
Morning, everyone. My name is Lori Flaherty. I'm the coordinator of the National 911 program. It's a position that I have served in since the program was established by Congress in December of 2004. For those of you that may not be familiar with the 911 program, it sort of serves as what a de facto home for 911 issues at the federal level. And the program has 3 jobs. The first job is to act as a convener and coordinator among all the entities, public or private, that have anything to do with 911. The second job is to collect and create resources for the folks that actually operate the 911 system at the state and local level. And the third job is to oversee a grant program specifically for the implementation of Next Generation 911. And we do that in conjunction with the NTIA at the Department of Commerce. It's in this third task that the program really has an active interest in the issue of fee diversion, because as many of you know, the grantees must certify that they are not diverting funds in order to apply for the grant, and they need to recertify every year that the funding is available. So we have definitely been in lockstep with the FCC on this issue every step of the way. And every question that comes up, we make sure that we compare notes with them so that our definitions of fee diversion are that match very closely. So I thank you, for including me in this group, and I look forward to working with everyone.
Thank you, Lori. Next, we'll go to Sheriff Sean Golden.
Jill, thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman and Chief Evanoff, and the members of this strike force that are going to do, I know will do a tremendous job on behalf of fee diversion and its intent. I look forward to working with Chairwoman Merriweather and Vice Chair Steve Sharp. I think this is a tremendous opportunity for all of us around the country to band together and take a look at, again, those best practices that we're going to hear from among states. But I will tell you, unfortunately, New Jersey is not one of them. New Jersey has been a longtime offender of fee diversion since 2006. I represent the New Jersey Association of Sheriffs here, the National Sheriffs Association, as well as the New Jersey Association of Counties for our 21 counties in New Jersey that dispatch and provide 911 service for over 75% of the local governments here in New Jersey. In New Jersey, we have seen fee diversion to the extent of $120 million a year collected for a total since 2006 of over $1.3 billion of diverted funds away from 911 services. This in total, in a screenshot and a snapshot, would amount to the coverage per year of just our 94 PSAPs here in New Jersey. 5-year capital investments from the counties, the 21 counties, have totaled over $300 million. And 1 year snapshot of our 21 counties is over $100 million of operating expenses in salaries and equipment. And so the diversion of $120 million is detrimental to public safety. I am so proud to represent the state of New Jersey, the National Sheriff's Association, and the New Jersey Association of Counties. And I do want to give a shout out to former Commissioner O'Reilly, who has been here personally in New Jersey in an effort to try to press upon our legislature and our governor's office to restore the funding, as well as the New Jersey Wireless Industry Association here in New Jersey. And so I've seen this 10 years. I've been Monmouth County Sheriff for 10 years, and we preside over the largest PSAP in the state of New Jersey, with over 121 public safety telecommunicators in the Monmouth County Sheriff's Office, and nationally accredited, and the first agency to do so. And also overseeing the construction of what is the state-of-the-art center of over 85 positions here in New Jersey, here in Monmouth County. So I look forward to working with the strike force and correcting some of the unfortunate diversion of funds in the states, and more so to see how other states are thriving with their 911 fees and where they go to public safety. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheriff Golden. Next, we go to April Hindsey. Tell me if I'm not saying your last name correctly.
Nope, you got it right. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm April Hindsey, the 911 and PSAP Operations Director with NENA, the 911 Association. I'll be representing NENA and the more than 17,000 members of our organization on the strike force. I've been with NENA for almost 2 years now. My responsibilities include industry innovations awareness, operational standards development, event production, industry and media relations, along with a number of other activities and projects. Prior to joining NENA, I was appointed to Michigan State 911 Committee by the Senate Majority Leader, where I continue to serve as a member and the Vice Chair. I've spent the vast majority of my career in 911 focused on PSAP operational issues. Before joining NENA, I spent 24 years at Eaton County Central Dispatch in Michigan, where I started my career as a public safety telecommunicator and worked my way up to director. I was then recruited while working for Eaton County to work for the NG 911 core services provider, spending nearly 3 years as a PSAP liaison and advocate. I'm excited to take part in this important endeavor with all of these impressive minds in the 911 field, and I look forward to working with each and every one of you to accomplish our goals that have been set forth.
Thank you, April. Next, we go to Karima Holmes.
Thank you, Jill. Good morning. I'm Karima Holmes. I'm proud to join you today as a member of the 911 Strike Force. Thanks to the FCC and Chairwoman Rosenworcel for this opportunity. Over the course of my career, which spans 22 years now, I have served as Executive Director at Emergency Communication Centers across the U.S., most recently a stint in Washington, D.C. At the end of January 2021, though, I transitioned to the private sector, and I'm now a Senior Director for the Incident Review Center at ShotSpotter. As a member of this strike force, however, I represent 911 Wonder Women, Inc., which I am a member of their board of directors. 911 Wonder Women is a 501c3 nonprofit founded to identify resources to provide mental health assistance, training, outreach, research, and other programming for 911 telecommunicators and dispatchers. I would also like to advise in full disclosure that I am a FirstNet Authority board member. I am currently in the 3rd year of a 4-year term. As a 911 industry advocate, my goal in all of these capacities is to bring awareness to and help elevate the visibility of the current plight of the 911 industry as a whole. I'm excited about the important work we're going to do together here, and I look forward to collaborating with you all to achieve our mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Karima. Next, we go to Thaddeus Johnson. Do you prefer Tad or Thaddeus? How do you go?
Thaddeus is perfect.
Thaddeus, take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am an Assistant People's Counsel for the District of Columbia, Office of the People's Counsel. And as the slides mentions, I represent NASUCA. And NASUCA represents the interests of utility consumers before state regulators and the courts. As an Assistant People Counsel in DC, I manage litigation and individual consumer complaints in telecom, natural gas, and electric matters. My background in utilities includes a position as a fiber installer and telephone repairman. So in addition to my personal experience, I've been inside many homes and know how much more secure people feel when they have full access to the lifeline that 911 can provide. So I think that this is very important work and look forward to joining you with it.
Thank you, Thaddeus. Next up, Captain Mel Meyer. Mel?
Hi, good morning. Thank you. My name is Mel Meyer. I'm a captain with the Oakland County Sheriff's Office in Southeast Michigan. I'm the director of 911 and emergency communications. Now, I have served more than 30 years in public safety and have worked and managed 2 different emergency communications centers. I've also been the past president of the Michigan Communication Directors Association, a former chair of funding and sustainment at SAFECOM, a former vice chair of the FirstNet Public Safety Advisory Committee, and most importantly, I've also had the opportunity to serve on the certifications subcommittee of what I believe is a model state 911 committee to assist local emergency communications centers to identify appropriate and allowable expenditures related to 911 surcharge funds. I am representing the major county sheriffs of America, whose members represent over 120 million citizens. We want to ensure that our 911 emergency communication centers across the nation are funded appropriately and continue to serve our communities staffed by those first among first responders. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mel. Next, we'll go to Deputy Chief Nicole Pickroll. Nicole?
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to participate on the strike force. My name is Nicole Pickroll. I'm the Deputy Chief of Communications and Support Services for Loudoun County Fire and Rescue in Loudoun County, Virginia. We're located about 35 miles outside of Washington, D.C. My portfolio includes the Emergency Communications Center, and I'm representing the International Association of Fire Chiefs. I look forward to participating in the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. And now we go to Mark Reddish. Mark?
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Reddish, APCO Senior Counsel and Manager of Government Relations. On behalf of APCO, I'd like to say thank you very much for including us in this group. APCO is the nation's oldest and largest organization of public safety communications professionals. Our members are primarily the state and local government employees who manage and operate public safety communication systems, including 911 emergency communication centers, emergency operations centers, radio networks, and IT systems for law enforcement, fire, and EMS. APCO has long been interested in how to address 911 fee diversion. We know that 911 centers already have a very difficult job and face funding challenges, so we're interested in anything that could help to ensure that they have the resources they need to make their work easier. And briefly about me, outside of APCO, I have certifications as an EMT and master firefighter, and have a little over 10 years of active service at a busy volunteer department in the DC area. But I'm really looking forward to being part of this group. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. And next we go to Lance Terry.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Lance Terry. You can also, my full name is actually Terry Lance Terry, so that's kind of a fun fact. My mom was creative, I guess. But I represent the Oklahoma 911 Management Authority, and on this board, I represent the taxing jurisdictions trying to stop 911 fees or diversion. And so in Oklahoma, I represent or oversee or coordinate 129 PSAPs in 77 counties. And I think one of the big things that I'm looking at is, we have counties in Oklahoma that can't afford 911 today. Up until recently, we had 5 counties without 911 service at all. And so it kind of, it puzzles me a little bit when there's fee diversion going on, when I think that there's places around the United States that do not have 911 at all. And so we need to look at how to level that playing field across the board to ensure that all citizens of the United States have that access to 911. And so, and the other thing I'm passionate about is making sure that we have the funding to support emerging technologies with strategic planning. And so that's one of the things I think we miss out is it's not just to have enough money to pay for what we have today, but what is going to happen in the future. And it's in government, we always stay behind, and with 911, we can't stay behind. So I'm pretty passionate about those things. I appreciate Chairwoman Kelly Merriweather for stepping up to lead us. And, she's one of my neighbors, and I definitely look up to her in her role there in Texas. So I appreciate it and look forward to working with everybody.
Thank you, Lance. And finally, we go to Dana Wahlberg. Dana.
Good morning. I am Dana Wahlberg. I'm the Director of the Emergency Communication Networks Division of the Minnesota Department of Public Safety. I am representing Minnesota DPS along with our 104 public safety answering points. And I want to thank the FCC for this opportunity. I have a 32-year career in 911 and public safety emergency communications. I spent my first 22 years in one of Minnesota's largest PSAPs. I began there as a telecommunicator and left there after becoming the PSAP operations manager during my last 9 years there. From there, I joined the Minnesota Department of Public Safety Emergency Communication Networks Division as the 911 program manager. In 2018, I was promoted or appointed the director position, where in addition to providing continued support for 911, I now provide support for our statewide land mobile radio system, wireless broadband through FirstNet, and our integrated public alert and warning system known as IPAWS. My passion and my goal is to provide the absolute best end-to-end public safety ecosystem for the state of Minnesota. We've been proud to call ourselves an early adopter state for next-gen 911 technology, and we look forward to having excessive interoperability through a robust and successful interoperable response for all public safety communication core networks. I'm thrilled to be working under Kelly's leadership, and I know many of the folks on this group through our respective tenures with NASNA. It's going to be an honor and privilege to be able to collaborate with all of these folks. And I have also been members of NASNA, NENA, and APCO for many, many years. So thank you.
Thank you, Dana. So that's our 17 main strike force members. Thank you all. We're definitely looking forward to working with each of you. Okay, now let's take a quick break. You all have done such a good job that you actually get a longer morning break. When we come back at 11:15, we'll talk about the rules for federal advisory committees. We'll see you at 11:15 promptly. Please try to make it back on time. Thank you all so much.
Welcome back, everyone. Next, we'll hear from Doris Gamble from the FCC's Office of Managing Director, who will discuss Federal Advisory Committee record-keeping requirements. Doris?
Good morning. Thank you all. My name is Doris Gamble, and I'm here to talk about your records management responsibilities. So the National Archives and Records Administration oversees all federal agencies' records management programs. So they're the ones who make the rules that govern how long records are kept and which ones are classified as permanent records because of their historical value. So to make things easier, NARA, National Archives and Records Administration, they created what's called a general record schedule. So this is a list of common record types that are across all agencies and how long to keep them and those details. So for Federal Advisory Committee records, they are going to be maintained in accordance with the General Records Schedule 6.2. And John, your designated federal officer, will share an electronic copy of the disposition authority, and that basically outlines the different record types and which ones we're going to eventually accession to the National Archives in accordance with the schedule, or which ones we, destroy at the end of the termination of the committee, or whichever is sooner, right? It lays it out line by line exactly what you're supposed to keep and what you're not supposed to keep. The disposition schedule, the GRS 6.2, it's media neutral, meaning it applies to all records regardless of format. So if it's paper, if it's audio visual, if it's an electronic record, etc., The same timelines apply. However, to comply with the December 31st, 2022 NARA deadline, all documentation going forward is supposed to be electronic, with the exception of any of the meetings that are going to be recorded, and those are going to be in a digital format that complies with the National Archives standards. And we work directly with the AV staff here at the Commission for all the meetings that are recorded here, video, audio, that kind of thing. So you don't need to worry about that. So what does this mean to all of you? And actually, a bottom line is it's pretty easy. We've tried to make it as easy as possible. All you're really required to do from a record keeping perspective is ensure that the DFO has a complete and accurate record that documents the committee's deliberations and decisions. So in order to do that, we've decided that the best, easiest way to capture all those records, right, and all the good work that you're doing is to copy the DFO on all your emails pertaining to the business of the committee or its working groups, and also copy the specific mailbox, the 911 Strike Force mailbox, which is already set up, I believe. And John can send out an email from that box with the schedule that I've been talking about to you. So that will make more sense when you see it. But really, generally speaking, we try to make it easier. We try to, you know, common sense is let's make sure that we capture all the good work that we're doing. And if it's electronic, all you need to do is make sure that that box is copied, and the records management folks at the end of whatever the specified time period is, we'll go ahead and take care of rolling it up and packaging it and accessioning it to the National Archives. And that's really all I have. Are there any questions for me?
Therese, I believe there are no questions for you at this time.
Awesome. Well, I will turn it back over to you, John.
Thank you, Therese. Next, Paula Silberthau from the FCC's Office of General Counsel is here to give us an overview of federal advisory committees. Paula, please note that Rachel Weir, an FCC honors attorney, will be managing our master slide deck. Paula, please just prompt Rachel when you are ready to move on to the next slide.
Sure
Paula,
thing. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Strike Force meeting. Rachel, if you can go to the first slide. Great. Okay. So some of you are familiar with advisory committees, some maybe not so much. So I'm going to go over a lot of basics at the beginning. And as I go along, you might have some questions, and that's fine. Feel free to interrupt me anytime you have a question, and I'll try to answer it. So the meetings we have here are governed by the Federal Advisory Committee Act. It's short. It only has about 12 sections, and it gives guiding principles, and it leaves many things to the discretion of the agency, subject to some rules promulgated by GSA. So in making our decisions of how things should operate, and GSA in promulgating its regulations are guided by the basic principles of openness in government, diversity and balance in membership, and public accountability. Next slide. One of the things that the statute, though, does clearly spell out is that there has to be timely notice of meeting and publication of meeting dates and agendas, general agendas in the Federal Register, generally on 15 days notice. But there will be occasions where, because of backups in the Federal Register or mistakes at our end, it might be a couple days less. But typically we announce everything 15 days in advance. And we also, to make sure everyone knows what's happening, we would also typically post it on the advisory committee website and maybe in a PN. And meetings And this is important to know because you don't want to inadvertently, when you guys are talking to each other, you don't want to inadvertently have a private meeting. So meetings include video conferencing like today, other internet-based conferences, telephone meetings, whatever. And something would be triggered to be a meeting, technically, if it's more than a quorum, more than a majority of, or half plus one of the total number of people who are parent committee members. Next slide. Okay, so FACA requires that as part of the notices that full committee meetings be open to the public, and outside people may submit written statements to the committee, and members of the public, time permitting, in the FCC discretion, may also speak to or address the committee. Otherwise, written comments would be submitted. Next slide. Okay. While meetings tend to be open, under some very limited circumstances, portions of meetings may be closed with agency approval after following specific steps. And this could be if, for any reason, there's a discussion of real trade secrets, classified government materials, or national security matters. We cannot simply announce at the time of the meeting that we're going to close the meeting off. This has to be done with notice in advance. So I think that probably your group will not have matters discussed which fall within these closed meeting exceptions. But if you see in advance that something is going to fall into that category, maybe there are some classified materials you want to discuss. So if you see that coming up, please get in touch with John. Let him know that could be an issue. And then we could take steps in the general counsel's office and with the chairman to close that portion of the meeting. Next slide. So the commission is required to keep minutes of meeting, including documenting the persons who are present and keeping records of the documents received or voted on by the committee. Often we do this through having a video tape of the meeting maintained, and then we have very abbreviated minutes of meetings so that people can figure out what was discussed. But if they want more of the details, they can go to and see the full discussion on the videotape. And we are required to keep the minutes, the transcripts, the videotapes, etc., available for public inspection and copying, typically at headquarters. Right now, that would be very difficult to do since we're not at headquarters. So if there is something you need to see or want to see, or if a member of the public wants to see any documents, I think that what we would do in this case is just people could get in touch with the DFO, with John, to obtain public access. Next slide. Okay, next slide. Right, okay, so just discussing who does what. The committee chair and the vice chair have a number of duties, and thank you for doing them. They often serve as a focal point for committee members. So if you have certain issues, you can bring them either to the DFO or to the committee chair, who will work with the DFO to resolve any problems. The committee chairs and vice chairs work with the DFO to set up very balanced working groups. And your chair or vice chair would typically conduct all parent committee meetings and make suggestions about meeting agendas. Next slide. And your DFO is really the focal point for things. If you have legal issues you want to raise, do's and don'ts questions, get in touch with John and He will coordinate with the general counsel's office, probably with me. The DFO would also call the meetings, approve the agenda, chair the meetings if your other chairperson was not around, maintain the committee records, as Doris noted, and make sure that the transcript of or the videotape of meetings are available and that minutes are taken. Next slide. I will skip the record keeping so you can go to the next slide here. I would just emphasize that we do need to comply with the regulations on record keeping. And the easiest way for you guys to do this is to copy the DFO on all the emails about your working groups or about the, questions about the parent committees, and also copy the designated VACA mailbox that's been set up for your advisory committee. Next slide. Okay, now this stuff is very important. So you'll be doing your work in large part, I would imagine, through informal working groups. And the working groups focus on gathering information, drafting reports, having meetings to discuss preliminary findings. Next slide. And a lot of business is done in the first instance through the working group. Now, the working group meetings can be, it's not on this slide, it's probably giving you this out of order, but the working group meetings can be, and typically are, closed. And that's because a working group is not, under the statute, an advisory committee itself. It's just an adjunct. And to make sure that it's just an adjunct, there are certain limitations imposed on the working groups. One of those is that the working groups and the voting members of the working groups should be less than a quorum. And basically the reason for that is that we don't want to predetermine what the parent group does. So if you had, 17 people in a parent group and 16 of those were in a working group, that working group would basically be a de facto parent advisory committee. So that's why you'll see when you set up your working groups that we keep them at a number that's less than a majority of the parent committee. So here are some do nots. The working group simply advises the parent group and might come up with some recommendations, but then you as the full committee need to review them independently and debate them at a meeting, and anything that comes up from a working group cannot just be rubber stamped, okay? Because the working group is just sort of your advisory group, but you have to, as the full committee, fully debate and review things that come up, make recommendations, modify the working group documents if necessary, whatever. Also, the working group, as a corollary of this, cannot speak on behalf of the full committee. So, for example, if you have a member or chair of the working group and it's a hot topic and you get interviewed by a newspaper, as I'm speaking just for the working group, you can't say, oh, the 9/11 strike force has decided to do such and such, because even though the working group wants to do it, it's just a working group. It's not the full parent. I emphasize that. It sounds pretty simple, but this has happened before, and it's a bad thing if that happens. So just remember, you could say, if it's already public and it's already out there, you could say, yes, that's correct. The working group has recommended whatever, and it'll go for discussion and vote at the next meeting. That's fine. Okay, the working group also cannot just send things over on behalf of the working group to the commissioners. Everything the working group does before it goes to the commission needs to go through the full committee. Okay, next slide. Recently, there have been frequent requests to gather information through surveys. And if you're considering anything, that feels to you like a survey, please coordinate with your DFO. And the reason for this is any surveys done by a working group would be subject to the Paperwork Reduction Act. And surveys need things that fall within the PRA definition, which is identical questions to more than 9 individuals or organizations. So if you're reaching out to more than 9 people, that would potentially trigger the PRA. If you're reaching out to fewer, just a couple people, or you're just gathering information from sources that you know individually, that would be fine. So if you have something that looks like a survey, please clear it first. Reach out to John, because it is possible to get some of that information from more than 9 people, but it might involve rewording questions, for example, more generally, and then we could post, it could be posted through a PN, or it could be put on the website for the advisory committee. So sometimes we just reformulate the questions, make them more general, and that would be okay. And the other things we sometimes do is develop different sets of questions that are truly differently focused, and send those out to 9 or fewer people. So there are different things that can be done, but please just think in your minds, I want to get information from the outside. Maybe this is a survey, and please clear anything like that first with John. And I want to emphasize the reason for following this protocol is if the PRA is violated, if you actually did a survey and it triggered the PRA and we didn't have OMB approval, which can take months, then we might not, and probably would not, be able to use any information you got through that survey. So we want to jump, if you're going to be reaching out to other people, we want to jump through the right hoops so you can actually use that information. Okay, next question, next slide. Okay, I already said this. You can, most of our working group meetings are informal. I would say this, if you do have, for some reason, a working group meeting that you wanted to be open to the public, you can do that. But then we might need to publish a notice, for example, in the Federal Register, or do something to make it open to everyone. We can't have meetings that are conducted in private, but people just invite their favorite colleagues to attend. So if it's a closed meeting, it should be closed to all but members of the working group, or possibly members of the parent committee. And if it's open, then we need to follow public notice procedures. So we can't discriminate if we're opening it up. And I would say this, so for when you're having your working group meetings, if someone from the parent committee that isn't assigned to that working group would like to observe, that is fine, but the observer truly can't speak, because if there are too many observers and those observers are actually talking and participating, then you might have evolved into a parent committee meeting. So if, there are occasions, usually only the people from the working groups attend, but sometimes the chair wants to find out what's going on in the different meetings, and the chair will just sit and listen to all of the working groups, or sometimes 2 working groups or 3 working groups have overlapping issues. And it might be beneficial for working group A, a member of working group A, to know what's going on in working group B. So sitting and just observing and listening is fine, but you really cannot participate in the discussions, because otherwise you could easily trip over and be having a full committee meeting by accident. Okay, next slide. Oh, okay. One other thing to mention about the working group meetings, even if they're closed, if there's someone whose input you want on an expert on a particular subject, you could invite that person to attend your meeting, and if they're willing to come and speak to you about a particular issue, and they can give you a presentation to you. You can ask them questions, have a discussion back and forth, but when their topic is done and when they've given their presentation, after that, they would need to leave the meeting. So they couldn't stay for your private deliberations about whether you agree with them or not, and they couldn't stay to listen to another topic that might be on the working group agenda. So you can invite people in, but when they're done, they need to leave. Ex parte rules. Typically, the advisory committees issue special public notices that provide for an exemption, a limited exemption from the ex parte rules. So it may come to pass that when you're having your working group meetings, or when you're having a parent committee meeting, that there's simultaneously an open docket on that subject that you'd be talking about. So in the normal case, that would trigger the ex parte rules. So you might have 6 of you on the committee that are talking about things that are pending before the commission. And normally all 6 speakers on that subject would need to file an ex parte notice. Because I think it is likely that your DFO will be working with me to create this PN, to create a waiver. Hopefully you won't need to worry about that. Next slide. So that's what I just explained, the exemption notice. That doesn't mean that if you say something significant that the commission wants to rely on, that it's going to remain a secret. Far from it. If the commission and staff decide that they would like to rely on something that is discussed at a meeting, or something that might be in your recommendations even, that you issue at the end, during or at the end of the term of the strike force, what would happen is that staff would take that recommendation and put it in the record of the docket that's discussing that issue. And similarly, if it were a verbal communication that they thought was very important, they would work with you to create an ex parte to submit in the record of that docket. I would say this, though. This exemption covers communications only when you as members are talking within the scope of your duties on the strike force. So, for example, if one of you represented a service provider and you were talking at a strike force meeting about what the strike force or your working group felt about something, that would come within the scope of the exemption. But if you also, let's say you were Verizon or something, if you also, your company had a position on this issue and you wanted to have a meeting with staff or the commission to represent your company, that communication representing the company and not the strike force would not be covered by the exemption. So you would just, so there's a different line between whether you're representing or acting on behalf of the strike force or acting solely with the interests of the company or other entity you represent. Okay, next slide. That's what I just said, so we can go to the next slide. Right. Occasionally, people who are on our committees get asked for their views about different issues, and sometimes those issues have not been voted, either by the working group or by the parent committee. So your First Amendment rights are intact, and if you're asked about something that's on the agenda and covered by the strike force work, it's absolutely fine if you say this is your view on something. But if it's your individual view and there's not something formal that's been voted by the working group or the strike force, please make clear that when you're expressing your view, it's individual. It's an individual view. On the other hand, if you're talking about recommendations that you vote later on by the full advisory committee, then you can say the advisory committee has voted X, Y, and Z. So it's just important to keep those distinctions when you're talking on behalf of yourself or the entity you represent, and when you're speaking on behalf of things that are already public relating to the advisory committee. Okay, next slide. Right, and the reason for this is we actually had an occasion where someone who was the head of a working group published an op-ed in a widely read journal and expressed his individual views, and he signed the opinion as John Doe, head of the blah, blah, blah working group. And it made it seem as though this was somehow the official view of that working group and really of that whole committee. And in fact, he was an extreme minority, maybe the only one who took that particular position. And so that created a lot of confusion, by the public as to what the committee was saying. So I think we're near the end. Next slide. Are we done with this part? Okay. So basically, if you are approached by someone to give your views on issues pending before the advisory committee, you might want to just give a heads up to the DFO so that you guys can work together to make clear whether whatever you're expressing happen to be the views of the full committee or whether they're your individual views. Next slide. Is there anything further? Nope, that's it.
Okay, thank you, Paula. And I want to ask the members whether they have any questions at this time for you. Members, if you have questions, please raise your virtual hand now. Okay, Paula, it appears that we do not have any questions for you, so I think we will break for lunch and then resume at 1 p.m. Today. Okay,
thanks, everyone.
Okay. Talk to you all at 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula.
Welcome back. Next, Rachel Weir, an honors attorney in the FCC's Policy and Licensing Division, Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, and a working group liaison for the 911 Strike Force, will be speaking about the requirements for the 911 Strike Force, as well as providing an overview of the issues the 911 Strike Force will study. Rachel?
Jill, can you advance the slides, please? Next one, please. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. At the end of 2020, Congress enacted the Don't Break Up the T-Band Act of 2020, which is Section 902 in Division FF, Title IX of the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021. Section 902 includes new congressional mandates related to preventing 911 fee diversion. In particular, Section 902 directs the Commission to issue final rules within 180 days, or by June 25th, 2021, defining what uses of 911 fees by states and taxing jurisdictions constitute 911 fee diversion for purposes of the new legislation. The Commission is currently considering a draft report and order with new rules to implement the requirements of Section 902. In addition, a second major mandate for the FCC from the new legislation is that Section 902D requires the FCC to establish the Ending 911 Fee Diversion Now Strike Force. As noted in prior comments today, the short form name will be the 911 Strike Force, and the 911 Strike Force will be organized under the Federal Advisory Committee Act, or FACA. First, I will discuss the purpose of the 911 Strike Force as outlined under Section 902. Second, I will outline the scope of 911 Strike Force's report to Congress. Third, I'll briefly address the membership categories, working groups, and resources for information for the 911 Strike Force. Next slide, please. Purpose. The purpose of the 911 Strike Force is to study how the federal government can most expeditiously end diversion by a state or taxing jurisdiction of 911 fees or charges. The 911 Strike Force must also make a public report to Congress on the results of its study. In carrying out this study, the 911 Strike Force shall, 1, determine the effectiveness of any federal laws, including regulations, policies and practices, or budgetary or jurisdictional constraints regarding how the federal government can most expeditiously end 911 fee diversion. 2, consider whether criminal penalties would further prevent 911 fee diversion. And 3, determine the impacts of 911 fee diversion. Next slide. Report. As required by Section 902, it is anticipated that not later than September 23, 2021, or 270 days after Section 902 was signed into law, the 911 Strike Force shall publish on the website of the Commission and submit to the Committee on Energy and Commerce of the House of Representatives and the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation of the Senate a report on the findings of the study mandated by Section 902, including 1, any recommendations regarding how to most expeditiously end 911 fee diversion, including actions that can be taken by federal departments and agencies and appropriate changes to law or regulations, and 2, a description of what progress, if any, relevant federal departments and agencies have made in implementing the recommendations under Clause 1. Next slide. Membership categories. Section 902 states that the 911 Strike Force shall be composed of representatives from 8 listed membership categories. These are such representatives of federal departments and agencies as the Commission considers appropriate, in addition to State's Attorney General, states or taxing jurisdictions found not to be engaging in diversion of 911 fees or charges, states or taxing jurisdictions trying to stop the diversion of 911 fees or charges, state 911 administrators, public safety organizations, groups representing the public and consumers, and groups representing public safety answering point professionals. On February 17th, of federal departments and agencies as the Commission considers On February 17th, 2021, the FCC's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau issued a public notice seeking nominations for 911 Strike Force members. On May 21st, 2021, the acting chairwoman appointed 17 members to the 911 Strike Force Parent Committee. Those appointments cover the 911 Strike Force's 8 statutory membership categories. In addition, as will be discussed in the next segment, the 17 Parent Committee members will be supplemented by 9 Working Group only members. The working groups will be comprised of a mix of the 17 Parent Committee members and 9 Working Group members. Next slide, please. Working Group tasks. I would like to briefly review the 3 topics that Congress set forth in Section 902 for the Strike Force to study. We have created 3 working groups, and each one has been assigned one of the 3 Section 902 topics. As you can see, the listed assignment for each of the 3 working groups tracks the language in Section 902. Working Group 1 will determine the effectiveness of any federal laws, including regulations, policies, and practices, or budgetary or jurisdictional constraints regarding how the federal government can most expeditiously end diversion by a state or taxing jurisdiction of 911 fees or charges. Working Group 2 will consider whether criminal penalties would further prevent diversion by a state or taxing jurisdiction of 911 fees or charges. And Working Group 3 will determine the impacts of diversion by a state or taxing jurisdiction of 911 fees or charges. Next slide, please. Diversion. The Commission may also refer additional specific tasks to the 911 strike force. In particular, Section 902 provides that if the Commission obtains evidence that suggests the diversion by a state or taxing jurisdiction of 911 fees or charges, the Commission shall submit such information, including any information regarding the impact of any underfunding of 911 services in the state or taxing jurisdiction, to the 911 strike force. Next page, please. Charter, webpage, and email account. The GSA has approved the charter for this Federal Advisory Committee. After the GSA's approval of the charter, PSHSB published a notice of intent to establish the 911 strike force in the Federal Register. The charter is available on the 911 Strike Force's webpage. The 911 Strike Force's webpage is available at https://www.fcc.gov/911 Strike Force. We will continue to update the 911 Strike Force webpage with information about the 911 Strike Force, including future meeting announcements. Regarding email communications pertaining to the work of the Strike Force and its working groups, Paula Silberthal mentioned, please CC all communications to the dedicated Strike Force email account at 911strikeforce@fcc.gov. This will help us meet our record-keeping requirements under the Federal Advisory Committee Act. Next slide, please. So we are excited to begin working with you and look forward to reading your report by September 23rd. We hope that the work that you do over the course of the summer will bring new clarity as to how we can most expeditiously end fee diversion so that 911 funds are not diverted from our country's critical 911 systems. With that said, I will turn the meeting back to John for questions on this presentation and then to introduce the next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Members, do you have questions regarding Rachel's presentation? Please raise your virtual hand now. Rachel, oh, it appears we do have one question. I will recognize Dana Wahlberg. Dana, please ask your question.
Thank you, sir. Several slides back, there was a mention of Section 902 directing the Commission to issue final rules within 180 days or by June 25th, defining what those uses of 911 fees would be. Is that on target, and can we expect to see that on June 25th?
I believe in her opening remarks, Acting Chairwoman Rosenworcel indicated that a draft would be circulated, and I anticipate that the Commission would meet a statutory deadline.
Thank you. I'm sorry that I missed that in her opening comments.
Thank you so much for the question. Laurie Flaherty, please ask your question.
Thanks, John. Just a point of clarification on the work to be done by Working Group 1. I think it reads, will determine the effectiveness of any federal laws. Just as a point of clarification, I would assume that would mean any existing laws as well as any new laws that the group would be considering, since that is part of the recommendation. I just want to make sure that I'm not misperceiving.
I am not aware of any limitations on the Working Group 1's, or rather the requirements laid out in Section 902 that would preclude Working Group 1 from studying new regulations that come out. Does that respond to your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, how about we forward this slide deck and move on to our next presentation. Thank you, Rachel, for your presentation, and thank you, Dana and Laurie, for your questions. Now we'll hear from the 911 Strike Force Chair and Vice Chair regarding the working groups. Kelly, Steve?
Thanks, John. We are very excited to be able to announce not only the assignments of the working group chairs and vice chairs, but also the working group task and membership. And so Dr. Steve Sharp and I are going to tag team on this a little bit. So I will take the first one. There will be 3 working groups, as Rachel explained in her presentation, and each group will have a chair and a vice chair. Working Group 1 will determine the effectiveness of any federal laws, including regulations, policies, and practices, or budgetary or jurisdictional constraints regarding how the federal government can most expeditiously and end diversion by a state or taxing jurisdiction of 911 fees or charges. As you can see, these working group and their tasks follow very closely to the statutory requirements. So that's what Working Group 1 will be working on. Steve, you want to describe Working Group 2?
So Working Group 2 will consider whether criminal penalties would further prevent diversion by state or tax jurisdiction of 911 fees or charges. The biggest thing is, are there existing or are there going to be proposed criminal penalties for agencies that divert 911 fees? I think we have a very good working group as we get to the introductions to evaluate whether or not criminal charges would help. I'll turn it back to Kelly.
All right, thanks, Steve. And so following on that, Working Group 3 will determine the impacts of diversion by a state or taxing jurisdiction of 911 fees or charges. So I think we also have a very clear idea among this group of what that means, and have a good pool of talent and unfortunate experiences perhaps to call upon when drawing up that information. So that's what Working Group 3 is going to work on. The next information to share with you is about the chairs and vice chairs. As we've discussed, there is a chair and vice chair for each working group. Working Group 1, the chair will be Budge Courier. He is the 911 branch manager of Cal OES, and the vice chair will be Daryl Branson, the state 911 program manager of the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. So this working group is in very good hands with this leadership that have been well-versed and involved in this issue for quite a while. So thank you, Budge and Daryl.
For Working Group 2, which will be looking at the potential criminal charges, the chair will be Richard Bradford, Special Deputy Attorney General of the Office of Attorney General at the North Carolina Department of Justice, as well as Vice Chair will be Thaddeus Johnson, the Assistant People's Counsel at Washington, D.C. Office of the People's Counsel, who are representing the National Association of State Utility Consumer Advocates. As I mentioned earlier, I think we have 2 really qualified individuals to help us look at the law and people who understand the law and see what we can come up with.
Mm-hmm. And then on Working Group 3, the chair will be Karima Holmes, Senior Director of ShotSpotter, representing 911 Wonder Woman, Inc. And the vice chair will be Dana Wahlberg, Director of DPS Emergency Communication Networks at Minnesota Department of Public Safety. Again, an excellent group there under the leadership of Ms. Holmes and Ms. Wahlberg to study that particular topic. And I apologize, we kind of took our talking points a little out of turn here, but I would like to introduce each of the Strike Force members that are listed on your slides here. So serving alongside Budge Courier and Daryl Branson, Work Group 1 will be Lori Flaherty, Captain Mel Meyer, Dr. Stephen Sharp, Matt Tooley, James Goldstein, Leah Misseldine, Kathy Jones-Gooding, and Mark Fletcher.
For Working Group 2, working beside Rich Bradford and Thaddeus Johnson will be Sheriff Sean Golden, Lance Terry, Cindy Barbara Burrell, Jeffrey Jelinski, and Patricia Coates.
And on Working Group 3, serving with Karima Holmes and Dana Wahlberg will be Chief Terry Clark, myself, Kelly Merriweather, Deputy Chief Nicole Pickroll, Mark Reddish, Barbara Neal, and Peter Beckwith. So those comprise the membership of each of the individual working groups. And thank you all for your service in advance on those groups. As you might have noticed, on each of these groups, there are a combination of strike force members, the 17 strike force members, and working group only members. The working group only members will provide their extensive expertise to the strike force, and we're really pleased to have such a talented team working with the working groups again, and we're grateful for your volunteering and your dedicated expertise and enthusiasm for 911. I'd like to now introduce those working group only members. As I call on each working group, please share with us who you are. I'll just call out the working group only members in the following order. And as I call your name, if you could just introduce yourself a bit and give us a 2-minute rundown of your experience and your expertise, and share with us about yourself. And also in that time, if there's anything that you need to disclose according to the FCC General Counsel's Office that you've been notified about, now would be the time to do that. So I will start out with Peter Beckwith. Peter, want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, Kelly.
Hi.
My name is Peter Beckwith. I'm General Counsel for South Sound 911, a consolidated countywide emergency communications center in Washington State. As the agency responsible for providing 911 services, we have an interest in fees collected for 911, obviously being spent on 911. However, we have no control over how the fees are collected, distributed, or potentially diverted. In our county, $9 million is collected for 911, of which our agency receives about half that amount, yet our state is listed as a non-911 fee diverter. Outside of my day-to-day job, I also serve as chair of the NG 911 Institute, which supports the Congressional Next Gen 911 Caucus. I look forward to supporting the work of the strike force through my role on the work group, so thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Patricia Coates.
Thank you. My name is Patricia Coates. I'm the administrator of CLEMIS, which is the Court and Law Enforcement Management Information System, a consortium of 10 counties in Southeast Michigan that's purpose is interoperability and to share data and systems. I'm also the 911 coordinator for the County of Oakland, which is about 1.2 million people in Southeast Michigan. I'm representing the Michigan Communication Directors Association. That is a professional organization representing PSAP directors, managers, et cetera, throughout Michigan. I have been in public safety communications for, this is my 46th year, pre-911, in fact. And I have been involved extensively in Michigan legislative efforts, et cetera, including our excellent record of non-fee diversion in this state. We have a very good system in place of checks and balances, of audits, of annual reports to the legislature about how the funds are spent, et cetera. I am a member of Michigan NENA. I'm a member of Michigan APCO, including past president, a member of the Michigan Communication Directors Association, including past president. And on the State 911 Committee, I sit on the Emerging Technology Subcommittee and the Legislative Action Subcommittee. For full disclosure, I am also the secretary of the Michigan Public Safety Frequency Advisory Committee, which is the Region 21 RPC. For those of you who are not familiar with RPCs, they're regional planning committees that work with approving frequency applications to make sure there is both interoperability and non-interference with neighboring radio systems in the 700 and 800 megahertz frequency bands, and we come under the auspices of the FCC. So that is my role as secretary of that committee. I am very much looking forward to working with everyone on the committee. I think this is a very exciting opportunity, and I thank you all.
Thank you, Patricia, for your years of service and for your service on this effort. Next, we have Mark Fletcher. Fletch?
Thanks very much, Kelly. My name is Mark Fletcher, better known as Fletch, and I'm a certified NENA emergency number professional. I've watched this industry evolve from when I first became a call taker in 1985. There was no local 911 system, just a 10-button phone that rang and provided nothing else. All the way through to my current role as Vice President of Public Safety Solutions at 911 Inform, where we distill and provide next-generation 911 data during emergency situations and better situational awareness to the ECCs. Previously, I've served on other FACA committees, including multiple sessions of the FCC's Disability Advisory Committee and the Task Force on Optimal Public Safety Answering Point Architecture. My role in Working Group 1 of this strike force is to provide subject matter expertise to the main committee on Next Gen 911 public safety technologies and the efficiencies that it will introduce that will allow agencies to provide the most benefit at a cost point that's efficient and manageable. This will help ensure that once those funds are recaptured for their intended use, that they're going to be used to their greatest efficiency. The General Counsel has asked me to disclose my participation in 2 work groups. Both are with the Industry Council on Emerging Response Technologies, or ICERT. And the first is the ICERT Policy Committee. That committee recommends to the board positions on local, state, regional, national, and international regulations, legislation, rules, or resolutions that affect emergency response technologies. And I also participate on the ICERT Public Safety Communications Interoperability Working Group, where we examine relevant industry issues and recommends for ICERT's consideration their position on next-gen 911 technologies. Now, this working group is only a think tank advisory role with no formal approval of policy function. I recognize a lot of people on this group. Thank you all for your service. I really look forward to working with my many past colleagues here, and I'm looking forward to getting to know all the new ones that I see on addressing this urgent issue of fee diversion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fletch. So glad to have you on board. Next up, we have James Goldstein.
Yes, hi. I am Jim Goldstein. I hope you can hear me. I am here representing as Director of Government Relations, the National Public Safety Telecommunications Council, also known as NIPSTIC, which is a federation of 15 different associations, including NENA, APCO, International Association of Fire Chiefs, the National Sheriff's Association, International Association of Chiefs of Police, amongst the other of the associations. Sort of my background, I spent 26 years with a major telecommunications company. Some of you probably heard of Motorola. I started in their law department doing government contract issues. I then moved to the public safety side in government relations. So I probably bring a little bit of a different perspective than most folks on the task force and on the membership, the committees. After retiring from them in 2010, I went to work for the International Association of Fire Chiefs, the IAFC, for 6.5 years. I focused on issues such as FirstNet, which was mentioned, the need for a broadband network, actually an issue the FCC got involved with on the T-band spectrum and the need for 11 jurisdictions to keep the spectrum, which actually is in the same law that talks about the 911 diversion. Acting Chairwoman Rosenworcel was a big supporter of doing away with the T-band. Also, Chairman Pai at the time was, which was somewhat unusual of a role for the FCC, but they spoke out and advocated, which was a big help in getting, finally getting the auction requirement out. As far as 911, I've sat in as staff member for the IFC on the idea of the beginnings of NG 911, what was needed on Capitol Hill, money, trying to get a unified voice on that issue. The other area that I sat on as a staff member for the IFC was the CTIA group they had on 911 indoor location technologies, the X, Y, and Z axes. And quite candidly, that is still going on. A roadmap was entered into in late 2014 amongst the four carriers at the time. Of course, Sprint and T-Mobile have merged, as well as APCO and NENA. The order was 2015, and there's still an issue. The carriers did not meet the Z-axis deadline currently. So that's sort of a whole background. So I come, I guess, a little bit different perspective, but I hope I can help on this and also at least provide some of my thoughts and experience on what's going to be successful to get to Capitol Hill to make sure that the fees are not diverted anymore. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jim, and welcome. And all the diverse background you bring to the group is very welcome. I think it'll be very beneficial. Thank you. Next up, we have Jeffrey Jelinski. Jeffrey? Did Jeff or Jeffrey?
Jeff is fine, but it's Jeffrey, but Jeff is absolutely fine.
All right, thank you.
And good afternoon again. I'm Jeff Jelinski. I'm a Morrison County Commissioner. I was reelected this past November, putting me in my third term as a commissioner. It's a 4-year term. I have a 911 background spanning 33 and a half years. Prior to being elected as a commissioner, I was the first person ever to hold the position of communications supervisor for the Morrison County Sheriff's Office, ultimately being in charge of the 911 center, holding the position of county emergency manager, and hearing and being the 911 coordinator for the county. I was asked by the Association of Minnesota Counties, AMC, to act as their representative on this, the 911 strike force. I currently chair Minnesota's Central Region EMS Joint Powers Board, Minnesota's Central Region Emergency Services Board, and I vice chair, for full disclosure, Minnesota's State Emergency Communications Board. Learning of the possibility of an alternate for this committee yesterday, I will be in touch with AMC and find out if they want or how they want to handle that. I'm truly honored to be here. I hope that I can add something to this committee. I go so far back as to remembering clearly dispatching anyone, anywhere by giving them directions. 2 miles this way, then you'll come to the red schoolhouse and you make a left-hand turn and then go about 1/4 mile, make a right-hand turn by a fence, and then there'll be a silo, make another left-hand turn, and you should get to your location. Before addressing was ever known to anyone in Minnesota, it was a rural route number. So I truly hope that I can help or give my part to this committee, and I'm, again, honored to be here, and thank you very much.
Glad to have you, Jeff. Thanks for joining us, and I'm, for one, very happy you're on the strike force because I really believe that all response is local and response needs to be fully informed by 911. So welcome. Appreciate your input. Thank you. Next, we have Kathy Jones-Gooding. Kathy.
Good afternoon. Kathy Jones-Gooding. I am the Deputy State 911 Coordinator for Operations. I started my career in 911 as a telecommunicator about 28 years ago, so nobody do the math now. And I worked my way up through various positions to being a training supervisor to a comm manager in South Carolina. And then recently, 2 years ago, I transitioned to state service with the great state of Washington. I am honored for the opportunity to work with so many talented and knowledgeable individuals on this very important topic. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kathy. We're glad to have you. Next up, we have Miss Leah Misseldine from Alabama. Welcome, Leah.
Kelly, this is Budge. I'm clearly not Leah. She let me know that she had to step away for another meeting. I don't know if she's able to respond, but she thought there might be a conflict at this time. So she's on the subcommittee with me or the working group with me, and I'm really excited about her expertise and what she's going to be able to offer.
Hey, Bud.
Go ahead, Adam.
I have a prepared introduction to read if y'all would entertain it.
I'm fine with that as long as it doesn't break any FACA rules.
No, ma'am. It's very general, but Leah does apologize for not being able to introduce herself. Again, as Budge said, she committed to a virtual speaking engagement months ago, and it is occurring right now. Leah is in her 23rd year in 911, starting as a part-time dispatcher, then progressing through the ranks as a training officer and supervisor, and then center manager. When the opportunity to join the state 911 program presented itself, she took that chance and has served on the state board staff since its inception nearly 8 years ago. Alabama prides itself at being a bit of a pioneer in the 911 field, thanks to many that have laid the groundwork ahead of us, and Leah is delighted to be in such esteemed company and looks forward to contributing to the Strike Force's mission. Thank you.
Thank you. And tell Leah, thank you very much for her participation and for preparing you so well. And thank you, Budge, for the heads up. Next, we have Barbara Neal. Barb?
Hi, thank you, Kelly. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Barbara Neal, Executive Director of the Vermont Enhanced 911 Board, and I'm representing that board during these Strike Force discussions. As a bit of background, the Vermont 911 Board was created in 1994 as the single governmental agency responsible for oversight and management of Vermont's statewide 911 system. As for me, I began my career in emergency services nearly 40 years ago, which is actually worse math than what Kathy just presented to you. 40 years ago as a volunteer emergency medical technician with my local ambulance service. Later, I became a 911 call taker, dispatcher, and emergency communications supervisor for the Vermont State Police, then a training coordinator with the Vermont Enhanced 911 Board, and finally, as executive director of that board for the past 6 years. I'm looking forward to getting to work on this very important issue as a member of Working Group 3. Thanks.
Thanks, Barb, and welcome to you and to your years of vast experience. Welcome. Thank you. And finally, we'll wrap up with Matt Tooley. Matt?
Good afternoon. Matt Tooley. I'm with the 911 dispatch in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Just celebrated my 22nd work anniversary on Tuesday, so I've been around. I've seen a lot of advancements in the industry. Very excited to be part of this group as well, to make sure that the funding is sent where it needs to be sent to keep those improvements going, to ultimately help the people that need help with 911. Full disclosure, I have been asked to mention that I am the executive council member for the South Dakota chapter of APCO. I'm an active member in both that as well as ENP with Nina. Again, thanks for the opportunity to sit on this board.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for participating. And thank you all. We're very much looking forward to working with you, and we'll be excited to get started very soon. I would ask if anyone has any questions at this point in time. If so, please raise your virtual hand. Seeing none, John, I suppose I will turn this back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Kelly, and working groups for your introductions. So Kelly, it won't surprise you that we're well ahead of schedule today. And so I would propose foregoing this scheduled break and perhaps going to public questions, or rather questions from the public. Would you concur?
I would concur with that, yes. Let's push through. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I'm going to ask the FCC team whether we have received any questions via livequestions@fcc.gov. Okay. Kelly, it appears we do not have any questions. Okay, we're back. It appears we had some technical issues. My apologies for the abrupt break in our meeting. We are now back. Just to recap, everyone, we are about to discuss next meeting and logistics. We have not received any public questions, or rather, we have not received questions from the public. And so to return everyone back to their busy schedules, we'll just launch into the next meeting and logistics. Okay, so and this will be the last item on our agenda, and then we can wrap up. So as Kelly and Steve introduced the members, it is expected that the working groups will meet at least weekly to perform work on their assigned tasks. Working groups are free to meet more often if needed. The first weekly meeting for each working group should commence soon, but no later than close of business June 11 this year. Working group chairs and vice chairs will coordinate these meetings with group members and keep the strike force chair and vice chair, as well as the designated federal officer and deputy designated federal officer, apprised of each group's meetings and work. FCC liaisons will attend all working group meetings. We will provide advance public notice of the next full 911 Strike Force meeting. Are there any questions from the Strike Force members at this time? If so, raise your virtual hand. Okay, seeing none, we will conclude today's first meeting of the 911 Strike Force. Thank you all for your participation. This has been a wonderful meeting, and we look forward to working closely with you in the near future. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.